that time of year again. The clocks are changing, the leaves and the seasons are changing, but one constant is that we will find ways to argue about movies on the internet. This time, it's for what movie deserves what gold statue. I'm talking about the Oscars, one of the most prestigious award ceremonies in the world of film. We have a giant, diverse array of films in the Best Picture category this year, and I cannot wait to talk to you about them. Hi, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. My name is Matt Keim, and today we're counting down the top 10 Best Picture nominees. Welcome back to Scope Networks, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. We have a lot of great stuff coming down the pipeline, including some stuff I'm currently not at liberty to talk about, but trust me, we got some great stuff, and we got some more die time coming up down the road, so if you want to see me get killed by my colleague Ben in very creative ways with the roll of a dice, give us a tune in. So remember to give us a like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. You're on YouTube, you know the drill by now. You may have noticed that ever since we started doing the Full Stop Reviews, about this time every year we do a top 10 movies of the previous year. I didn't have the chance to make that video this year specifically because I was moving during the period of time where I would have had to have produced that video. But fortunately, the Oscars are actually coming up, so we decided to take a crack at that. So if you're curious about my top 10 movies of the year, I might put them in the comments. So if you want to argue about with movies in the comments, have at it. I don't have a life. Let's fight in the comments. But I wanted to talk about the Best Picture category this year. So the category has gone through a couple of changes in the last few years. After 2008 and the backlash that the Academy got for not nominating movies like The Dark Knight, for example, they expanded the quantity of nominees from 5 to 10. A few years ago, they changed it to has to be at least 5, can be as many as 10, but whoever got a certain threshold of votes would go into the next category. They changed it again in 2021, stating that 10 movies do in fact have to be nominated. So, to make a long story short, I had to watch a lot of movies to do this. In lieu of doing a top 10 movies of 2022 list, which I'm really disappointed I missed the boat on that because there were a lot of great films that came out last year that I'm just not going to talk about, especially in the context of this video, I'm going to count down the nominees from 10 to 1. Now, quick disclaimer about this. There's a reason why these films were all nominated for Best Picture. They're all for the most part, really, really good films in one aspect or another. So it's not like whatever I put at 10, 9, 8, etc. It's not like the movies at the bottom of the list are bad by any stretch of the imagination. And so I don't want to give the wrong impression that I think movies are bad or that I hated any of these movies, because I really didn't. But the top half of this list, I truly, truly loved these movies. And so to me, certain movies worked a little bit better on some levels than some of the others did. And as per is the usual with things like this is just one idiot's opinion on YouTube. So if you take exception to it, instead of calling me names, just put your own list in the comments and we can argue, because I am dying for a fight right now, apparently. One of the things I loved about the Best Picture category this year is that movies are so different from each other. From our standard music biopic, which there's always like 1 or 2 of those each year, to war epics, to period dramas, to intense character studies, to black satires, it's like no 2 movies in these categories are similar. That was one of the things that was the real joy about making this list, is that there are very different movies with very different things to say and very different voices behind the camera. And it was really, really neat to be exposed to all of it. So let's go, top 10. Okay, number 10, Elvis, directed by Baz Luhrmann and starring Austin Butler and Tom Hanks. So the thing with this one is that your opinion on this movie is going to depend on 2 factors. The first is whether or not you like musical biopics, and the second is whether or not you enjoy Baz Luhrmann's style, because Baz Luhrmann has a very unique style. Like, almost everything's basically like a music video. I saw someone describe his style once as like a cocaine-infused fever dream. He has a very unique style, and it's very, very well known. So if you know Moulin Rouge or even like The Great Gatsby, like those quick, almost like over-dramatic camera movements and like anachronistic soundtracks, like there's Jay-Z playing in the Great Gatsby movie. I forget who it was, but there's like hip-hop songs playing during scenes when they're on Beale Street in the early 1950s. Clearly anachronistic, you can tell they're having a lot of fun with this movie. One of the things that kind of like stopped me from connecting too much with this movie was that it is a musical biopic and it does fall into the same traps as most movies of this ilk, from the rise to stardom to the fall due to the greedy manager to the drugs to the family life stuff breaking. It's like, if you've seen any music biopics that weren't intended towards like Oscar fame, this really doesn't do anything too differently outside of the way it's directed. There's such a frenetic pace to it, and Baz Luhrmann's style is so much fun, at least to me, to where it was an enjoyable experience. I do think the movie was probably about half an hour too long, and I think the weakness of the way this movie was presented is that the movie's kind of so fixated on its presentation, on showing off Austin Butler performing as Elvis on stage, to where a lot of the character moments get lost. So there's an example, during the scene where Elvis and Priscilla get divorced, that doesn't have the impact that it should, just because Priscilla's, like, despite the fact that she's been a visual presence on screen for probably about an hour by that point, the amount of scenes she actually has dialogue in is significantly lower than that. So it's just like, you can't quite connect with the characters. And the problem with music biopics is that they kind of just expect you to connect to the characters just because you're a fan of that band. Like, I'm a fan of Elvis's music. Like, the movie expects that you've kind of already done the work just because you've listened to the albums or something like that. And so I don't think this movie does enough to make it stand out from other music biopics, despite the fact that it has a really good performance from Austin Butler, and Baz Luhrmann's style is so damn fun to watch. And I gotta say, the goofiest scene of the year is this one right here. You can tell that there's a self-awareness to this movie that just makes it a lot of fun, but I also think it's probably the weakest movie of the crop. Okay, number 9, Ruben Östlund's Palme d'Or winner, Triangle of Sadness. Before I talk about the movie, I want to shout out, rest in peace, Charlie Dean. She actually passed from a bacterial infection of sepsis back in August, and so this is one of her last ever on-screen roles, and it's super tragic because she was super young, and she does a great job in this movie, and she was a really, really talented actress. So this movie is actually kind of like the latest in what has developed as like a weird little subgenre where it's kind of like black satires poking fun at rich people. So this movie is like White Lotus meets Lord of the Flies. And so if you've seen like any of the Knives Out movies, like Knives Out, Glass Onion, either season of White Lotus, or like The Menu that just came out last year as well, or hell, even Parasite kind of qualifies into this. It's kind of that ilk where it's like the ridiculousness of rich people juxtaposed with the people that are normally seen as subservient to them. It's that kind of dichotomy, and a lot of the comedy comes from that. Some positive moments, the acting is strong, really strong across the board. The scene stealer, Woody Harrelson's not in this movie for a long time, but the scenes he is in are hysterical. There's a scene about halfway into this movie involving a ton of vomit and other bodily fluids, and apparently at screenings of this film they gave out barf bags as like part of the promotion. Apparently they gave out barf bags at some of the theaters, and after seeing this movie I'm like, yeah, I kind of see why you might need one of those. So this movie is a collection of great individual scenes. And there's like this really awkward scene at the beginning of the movie involving fighting over who pays the check. One of the problems I had with this movie is that, despite the fact that it's a great collection of individual scenes, I felt like it wasn't as cohesive maybe as it should have been. But the film was hysterical. It did really well in the awards circuit. Like I said, it won the Palme d'Or, which is at the Cannes Film Festival. Yes, it is pronounced Cannes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I swear to God. No, don't fight me on this. It's pronounced Cannes, you I just kind of compared it to a bunch of other movies like the White Lotus film, like the White Lotus series, etc. If you've seen any of those, you kind of get a lot of similar beats, or even the menu. It's like not that different than those, and so it's also kind of like, I think that's like 4 such projects released within a span of about 6 months of each other, and so it feels a little bit like you're being beaten over the head by these kinds of projects and these kind of themes. And not to get too political, but when rich people are making these movies intended for a rich audience and being funded obviously by people with money, it starts to fall flat after a while. I will say, to its credit, this movie is a little bit more cynical about people in general, as opposed to just different classes of people. But like I said, the movie is just so damn fun to where a lot of like the critiques are a little bit more surface value. And that's number 9, Triangle of Sadness. Number 8, Avatar 2, The Way of Water, starring basically everybody that was in the first one. They all find ways to get slotted back into the film. So Giovanni Ribisi, Sam Worthington, Sigourney Weaver, Zoe Saldana, Stephen Lang even comes back. And there are so many other characters that this film centers on that it's kind of, I'd be listing them all day. Me personally, I wasn't like the biggest fan of the first Avatar movie. I didn't dislike it. I very much enjoyed it, but I saw it like once or twice and then just forgot about it. I will say it was an amazing theatrical experience the first time it was around. It was an amazing technical filmmaking experience, just from the animation to advancements in motion capture. It's not like it was the first film to do mocap, but it certainly took it to another level. And this one is just as impressive on a technical level. My God, it is so immersive. There's a lot of jokes around this film to where it feels like you're watching Planet Earth, except it's Planet Pandora, so the only thing that you're missing is the voiceover. This film shines and drags at the same time, because in the middle hour of this film, when they go to a different village on Pandora, a seafaring village, and you get to interact with the water and the sea life, and they're underwater, and it's just, how the fuck do they film this? It's so immersive and so real, you almost forget that you're watching a movie. It almost feels like you're at an aquarium or something, or you're even in the water snorkeling, for any of you that have ever done that. It's so immersive and so much fun, and James Cameron is amazing at directing these epics, and he's been doing this since Terminator, with super advanced visuals that are always pushing the limit for what he can do next. And he's another shining point of James Cameron is he's actually really good at doing sequels, from Terminator 2 to Aliens, and now this. And while I don't think this is nearly as good as the previous 2 examples I just listed, one thing I really appreciated is that the focus and the types of character arcs that he wants to show in this movie are different. So Neytiri and Jake Sully are obviously still together, they have kids, and so their struggle is more of their parents trying to protect their family, which is a very different basis for character growth than the events of the first one, which, you know, dances with Smurfs, all that. In a lot of ways, this film does mirror the first one with a lot of plot points, but with a lot of the character beats, it's a lot of newer stuff, and it's not like it's super sophisticated in what it does, but you do buy it at the same time. The kids, for the most part, are good additions to the cast, and I will say one of the movie's problem is that it's like 3 hours and I think 15 minutes, 3 hours 12 minutes, something like that. It doesn't necessarily justify that length, and there are points in time where you notice the length. I don't think it detracts from the experience all that much, but it is noticeable. I think they shot the third one at the same time that they were doing this one, so I'm really, really curious to see where they go next, just because this is one of the few franchises that's not based on a book, not based on a previous movie, not based on a video game. It's like, the original Avatar was a wholly original idea. Obviously, the Pocahontas and all that stuff notwithstanding. But the world of Pandora, the world of this story, is completely unique, and I'm actually really curious to see where they go next. Number 7, Joseph Kosinski's Top Gun Maverick. Man, you know what my biggest movie regret last year is not seeing this in theaters, because you needed to have seen this in theaters. The visuals are insane. The practical stunts and effects that they get are insane. I love that they actually put some of the actors into like the co-pilot seat in jets and stuck a camera in there, and so they actually took everybody up and had them flying. And there is such a care in the way this movie is crafted and paced, and it's just so much fun. It's such a great experience. I gotta be honest, I actually think that this one is better than the original Top Gun. I wasn't a huge fan of the original Top Gun. I think this one is actually a lot better. I like that tension of Tom Cruise's character being deep enough into his military career to where he has to teach and command other people when his name's Maverick. He works alone and he wants to be the guy in the front lines, but in this one he can't necessarily do that. Now, granted, the movie does contrive a way to put him in the front lines because, you want to see Maverick flying that plane. I think it handles the idea of middle age and dealing with the younger generation. I think it deals with those ideas in some really fun ways. Man, I just hope I get to see this one in theaters instead of on the on-flight movie that I initially saw it on for the first time. Although I gotta say, seeing this on an airplane was still cool. Okay, number 6. Before I announce the movie, I do have to do a bit of a content warning. This next film does deal with topics like sexual assault and a lot of related issues. So if any of that bothers you, I do have time codes in here, so if you want to skip to the next one, feel free. Just fair warning. So number 6, Women Talking, directed by Sarah Polley, and starring Rooney Mara, Claire Foy, Jessie Buckley, and Ben Whishaw, with minor appearances by actors like Frances McDormand. This one's actually based off of a real series of events called the Ghost Rapes of Manitoba, which were there were a series of Mennonite colonies that left the United States and set up shop in like Mexico and Central and South American countries like Bolivia, for example. So the real incident happened in Bolivia. Over the span of about 5 years in the mid-2000s, over 100 different women reported having been assaulted in their sleep by men of the colony, and they were essentially gaslit by everybody to think that it was like female imagination or they were possessed by demons or something. And the end result of this is that a few of them eventually were caught, and I think a dozen people served prison time in relation to these events. And so the disclaimer is that over 100 reported it, so it probably happened hundreds of times to over 100 people. In 2018, there was a book called Women Talking that was released about this film that kind of deals with like a fictionalized version of these events. And so this movie is based on that book and not necessarily a one-for-one retelling of those events. So this movie is a lot more allegorical with its presentation and the conversations that happen, as opposed to being like a historically accurate docudrama, if that makes sense. And in fact, I don't even know in the movie, I don't know if it's like this in the book or not. There's really nothing to indicate that they're even in Bolivia. The only indication of what year it's even set in is that someone drives to their village and asks for people to come out to be counted for a 2010 census. And so for all I know, this film could actually be set in the United States, but the film is so vague about its setting that it kind of becomes a ubiquitous presentation to where this could have been anywhere at any point in history at any time. And so that's kind of the point, is that this film is really, really allegorical with the way it deals with these events. It's a very, very harrowing piece of media to watch, but I also think it's a very necessary film to watch at least once. One of the reasons why I really, really enjoyed this movie is that it's kind of presented in the same style as 12 Angry Men, where you have a group of people who have been given a decision that they have to make. They're all in one room for the most part, and they have to debate their point of views until they all come to a consensus on what to do next, with the knowledge that these events and the choices that they have to make will have great ramifications for a lot of people outside of that room. But again, 12 Angry Men, and you even have a character that's kind of akin to the foreman in 12 Angry Men, with the one male character who has more than one scene in this film with August. He's just there to kind of like record what the women are saying. He's just there to listen, basically. He's not there to actually talk, and so he is like super, super self-conscious about whether or not he should say anything, even when he's asked for his advice on what they should do. Another reason why the doing it in this style, the style of like confined to one room, works, is that the film kind of reinforces this oppressive atmosphere that these women have found themselves in. So they're in a barn, but you see in the background the planks and the beams of wood. They kind of give off like almost, it's visually evocative of being in a prison. The color scheme is very, very muted, which was actually a point of criticism for some people, but I enjoyed it because the muted color scheme kind of gives off the idea that it kind of reinforces, between that and the confined setting, kind of reinforces the oppressive space that these women have found themselves in and are trying to get out of. And so I thought the cinematography in this film was great. I thought the acting was phenomenal. This film really just puts its actors front and center. And everybody I just named just knocks it out of the park. And I really, really enjoyed this movie. Number 5, Tar, directed by Todd Fields and starring Cate Blanchett, Nina Haas, and Sophie Kauer. So the weird thing about this movie is that it's kind of marketed like it's a biopic. Like, if you look up the plot synopses and things like that, they all kind of read something to the effect of the life and career of Lydia Tarr, the first female conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, and her downfall, or something to that effect. But like the way it's written kind of gives you the impression that you should already know who Lydia Tarr is. And so it fooled myself and a lot of other people into thinking that this movie was based off of a real person. It's not, it's fictional. But I kind of like that they present it that way because there's a certain intentional pretentiousness to this movie, and I'll get into why on that is in a minute. This movie features an amazing performance, an amazing character study from Cate Blanchett. She got nominated for Best Actress. She's one of 2 people that I think should win that award. The other one we'll be talking about in a few minutes. In the movie, the way it's writing, between the writing, the directing, and Blanchett's performance, you get the impression that this is a real person. It's such a richly realized character to where it's like, it's so engrossing to watch as she navigates this world of high society and classical music and her past mistakes catching up to her, despite the fact that she's too narcissistic and pretentious and frankly insecure to admit her own failings until it's too late. The acting from the rest of the characters is really, really good, but like I said, this movie is a character study about one person, and as such, the movie will rise and fall depending on how good that performance is and how richly realized that character is. And Todd Fields and Cate Blanchett succeed tremendously with this film. I mentioned that I think this movie is a little bit pretentious. I do not mean that as a criticism. I think that was intentional, and because it kind of reinforces how that character sees herself, especially at the beginning of the film. So one of the weird quirks of this movie is that they play the entire credits, not just the opening cast and some key crew members and things like that. They play this movie goes through its like 5 or 6 minutes of credits before the first scene, and the second scene is like a 15-minute interview that's kind of building this character up and her larger-than-life accomplishments. And it's a lot of long, slow tracking takes. And there's another great scene right after that where she's giving a guest lecture at Juilliard, where it's a singular, it's like a one-cut take with lots of sweeping, grand camera motions, almost as if Lydia Tarr is directing the camera and directing the scene and composing it herself. Now, as the movie goes on and her life starts to unravel, the camera movements change, the cutting gets quicker, we get more handheld shots, and so this movie is a very, very well realized from a crafting standpoint as well as from a writing standpoint. It's 2.5 hours long, but you don't feel a single minute of it. It's engrossing, and it's such a cool world, and it actually ends in a pretty funny note. So, number 5, Tar. Number 4, The Fabelmans, starring Steven Spielberg, Michelle Williams, Seth Rogen, Paul Dano, Gabriel LaBelle, and Judd Hirsch. So this movie is more or less an autobiography. The Fabelmans are used as a stand-in for the Spielbergs in his childhood, but it's the same exact thing with the parents, with the dynamic. Some people have called this movie a little overindulgent. I don't think this movie is necessarily a glorification of Spielberg's past as much as it is a confession. And it's really like part coming of age story, but it's also part watching this family slowly disintegrate as the mother deals with mental issues and the dad is a workaholic and the marriage dissolves. Between any of the bad stuff that happens, between any family drama or bullies or girlfriends or cross-country moves, a young fableman, i.e. a young Steven Spielberg, finds his solace behind the camera, which kind of gives him a level of detachment from what you see on screen. And so it's a really unique almost perspective Spielberg has of himself, where he's almost dissociating and using his Bolex camera as a protective barrier between him and whatever is going on. And I thought that was a fascinating angle to play it at, as opposed to just a straightforward biopic. This movie is super endearing. The characters are wonderful. There's a lot of great moments, a lot of really funny moments, and just a lot of moments that tug at the heartstring. There's a lot of cameos in this movie, like David Lynch has a scene towards the end of the movie where he acts as a very, very famous film director, and it's the scene's just hysterical. It'd be easy to dismiss this as another Hollywood movie about Hollywood, but I think this movie has a lot more going on to it than just that, and I think this is a wonderful film. Number 3, my favorite feel-bad movie of the year, All Quiet on the Western Front. You know, when they announced that they were doing an updated version of this book, I came into it with a little bit of trepidation. All Quiet on the Western Front is probably the most famous German novel ever written, certainly the most influential of the past 100 years. And there's already been a couple film editions of it, both of which succeeded tremendously. There was a 1930 edition of this film that was one of the first ever Best Picture winners, and there was a 1979 made-for-TV film that is very, very effective as well. And so I came into this movie with a little bit of trepidation just to see if it had anything new to say, and as it turns out, it does. World War I has never looked this good on film. We got 1917 a few years ago, now we got this. But for the most part, a lot of the World War I movies kind of got supplanted by World War II movies, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, and I may make a video essay down the line going into this movie a little bit deeper because I have a lot to say. But for the sake of brevity, directed by Edward Berger, this is the third on-screen adaptation of this novel, and it's the first one to actually be in its original German language. There's a lot of reasons for why it took so long to get a German language version of this. Most of it boils down to the fact that it was banned by the Nazis. But because this is not an American production, it's a slightly different perspective on the war. Horrors of World War I are fully realized in a lot of different ways. Just like 1917 did a few years ago, I'm glad that this war is getting a little bit more cinematic attention than it did for several decades. Every horrifying detail of World War I, from being shelled in the trenches to charging across no man's land to being the first soldiers who ever had to go against monstrous inventions like gas and tanks and flamethrowers, and just the general futility of that war is juxtaposed with the people who are trying to end it. There's kind of a formula to the scenes in this movie, is like whatever the worst possible outcome of that scene could be happens. This is not a happy story, this is not a feel-good story, but it's also been one of the more necessary stories throughout the decades. The acting is phenomenal. Albrecht Such, who plays Kat, has some of the best nonverbal acting I think I've ever seen on film. There's one scene that actually didn't happen in the book that this movie has, where he's being read a letter from home, and just seeing him physically react to different portions of the letter, some funny, some sad, some devastating. Just seeing that shift in the span of a single take was phenomenal. I wish he had gotten more acting attention for this, to be honest. This one should easily win Best Foreign Feature. I wish that it had actually gotten more acting attention for some of the reasons I was just saying. The movie is horrifying, it is haunting, and it does a pretty good job of realizing Eric Maria Remarque's, the original author's, point of view when it comes to the war. I loved this movie. The reason why it's at 3 and not at 1 is that as an adaptation, it changes a significant amount from the book. And I'm not normally one to complain, oh, the book did this, so the book had the character wearing a red shirt in that scene, so he has to wear a red shirt in the movie, but he wore a green shirt, so the movie sucks. I'm not one to get that detail fixated with that sort of thing, but I do think that some of the themes of the book are a little bit lost in translation, especially given the climax. The movie has a more bombastic climax than the book did, and I think the book was trying to make a slightly different point than the movie is. Now, the movie has the benefit of hindsight, and so there's a lot of new scenes and characters that are in this that were not in the original book, but I think those scenes and changes do justify themselves. It's just coming from a slightly different point of view on the same story, not unlike Kubrick's The Shining, as far as it relates to its original book. If you're okay with these changes, you will probably enjoy this movie. It is a harrowing watch. You do have to be in the right space of mind to watch it, just because this is one of the more haunting war stories ever told, and this does a great job of bringing it once again to the screen. Number 2, Martin McDonagh's The Banshees of Inisherin, starring Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, because of course it does. If you've seen any Martin McDonagh movie, there's a very good chance that these two are in it. A reunion as far back as like In Bruges, which is a wonderful movie. Go see In Bruges. This one also stars Barry Keoghan and Kerry Condon, and technically this movie actually started out as a play. So Martin McDonagh, before he made films, he was a playwright, and his most famous series of works involves something called the Aran Islands plays. And it was supposed to be a trilogy. So The Lieutenant of Inishmore, The Cripple of Inishmin. The original story of this movie started out as the third one in that play set on a different island, and then eventually got changed up. It's set in 1924 on the fictional island of Inisherin. It's about two friends who come to a crossroads in that relationship when one of them, out of the blue, decides to stop being friends with the other. Like most Martin McDonagh productions, this one excels at black comedy that also makes you feel really deeply for all the characters involved. At times hysterical and at times devastating, this movie is so precisely written and directed and so funny. It's infinitely rewatchable, and there's a lot going on here below the surface. In a lot of cases with this film, what isn't said is just as important as what is being said. And it also features probably my favorite one-liner in any movie this year, in this scene right here.
Punching a policeman is a sin.
I hear. If punching a policeman is a sin, we may as well just pack up and go home.
It's just a funny scene. This is a funny movie. It's really, really well acted. Barry Keoghan does a great job in it as well. I honestly think this is in the running for Martin McDonagh's best movie alongside In Bruges. I thought it was that good. Which brings us to number 1. You probably know what it is by now, just by process of elimination. There's only one other that it could be. A24's Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed by Team Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, and starring Michelle Yeoh, Ke Huy Quan, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Stephanie Hsu. This might be A24's first movie to win Best Picture. By the way, all of the actors I just named are all nominated for Oscars. They probably won't all win, but the fact that they all are in this position to begin with should tell you the level of acting that happens in this film. So this is actually a really, really dense film. It's almost hard to even spoil the movie because there's so much context you would even need to understand what is being spoiled. But the plotline is basically a first-generation immigrant struggles to keep her store and keep her family together at the same time, despite the fact that her entire family seems to be going in different ways. So there's a lot of different ideas in this movie, from generational trauma to fighting to keep the family together, on when to fight, when to let go, reflecting on your past choices in life and dealing with the consequences of those choices. Like, had I done this, this is how my life would have gone, but had I said this moment at this time, I would be in a relationship with that person, or my relationship with this person would look like this instead of like this. There's a lot going on. This movie is so heartfelt and so genuine and so emotionally raw that is just pulls at the heartstrings for almost the entirety of its almost 3-hour runtime. And it deals with these themes in one of the most creative ways I've seen in years, where you have things like the multiverse coming along, and it's a very different take on that idea than like you'd see in like the Marvel movies, because the newest phases have all been kind of dealing with multiverse ideas. The awesome thing about this movie is that it's a great showcase for Michelle Yeoh, because you get to see her in a lot of different contexts, so she has to fucking bring it in every scene. From her history in martial arts films to more dramatic to some comedic stuff, this movie asks a lot of her, and she delivers in almost every scene. This movie is so good that a scene of 2 rocks will almost make you cry. It'll make you laugh and cry within the span of about 30 seconds of each other. It's that good. And more to the point, it invests you that much. Another underrated thing about this film, if you know what to look for, this film is filled to the brim with references to a lot of famous movies. So like, again, it gives Michelle Yeoh a chance to show off her martial arts skills, which obviously she has a pretty big history with that genre especially. There's also references to movies, to really famous Hong Kong cinema like Chungking Express. And one of the most touching scenes in the film, the I wouldn't have minded doing taxes with you scene. The way it's shot with the shutter speed that it uses is such a dead ringer for like Chungking Express, that like if you can catch these references, it just gives you a more enriching experience as the film. It's one of my favorite movies that I've seen in a very, very long time, and I really, really hope it wins Best Picture, and I hope Michelle Yeoh wins Best Actress. Thanks for sticking with me to the end on this one, guys. Had a blast making this video. Had a blast watching these movies. They were all really, really good movies, like succeeded on very different levels. Are you guys going to be watching the Oscars? If you're watching this video after the Oscars, what do you think of the results? Do you agree with my list or whatever the winners end up being? What did you think was the best movie of the year? What did you think was the best movie in these categories? Do you agree with my list? I want to know. More importantly, I want to fight with strangers on the internet, so bring it. Remember, like, comment, subscribe. We are still covering plenty of shows with Return of the Show, and we got some really fun stuff coming up later this year, so stick around. And as always, it's Full Stop Reviews.